One day, a 17-year-old athlete named Yuhan Sol took part in a major professional event where he wanted to lift a barbell weighing 10 tons. Yuhan trained his body hard over the years and became stronger in order to one day become the strongest being on Earth, and thereby make history. Despite such a huge weight of the barbell, Yuhan was still able to lift it off the ground and lift it. Yuhan's muscles were so tense that his clothes began to tear the moment he lifted the barbell. However, at one point Yuhan felt ill, and while lifting the barbell, Yuhan let go of the barbell and fell to the ground. Yuhan lay unconscious on the ground, and blood began to flow profusely from his nose, and then the organizers immediately demanded that the doctors return Yuhan to consciousness as soon as possible. However, the medical team failed to save Yuhan's life, and after his death, Yuhan opened his eyes and saw the blue sky in front of him. Then Yuhan thought that nothing would have happened to him now if his muscles were even bigger and stronger. While Yuhan continued to lie on the ground unconscious, he gained new skills such as boundless musculature, battle compression muscles, and hawk vision. A few seconds later, Yuhan's body found itself in the middle of a green field, along which many well-fed chickens were walking. Soon, the chickens began to peck at Yuhan lying on the ground, causing Yuhan to wake up soon after. Having come to his senses, Yuhan noticed that he was in the middle of a huge field, in which there were a lot of huge chickens, and high mountains could be seen in the distance. At this moment, Yuhan thought that he was in a personal hell with a lot of chickens, since in his past life he ate chicken meat very often. While Yuhan was thinking about where he ended up, huge chickens continued to try to peck at Yuhan's face, and he decided that these chickens were trying to attack him. Yuhan began to get very annoyed at how the chickens were trying to peck at him, and then a somewhat irritated Yuhan finished off one of the chickens. Yuhan also thought that in this world he would not be able to access pure protein. The moment Yuhan looked at the chicken again, his hawk vision skill was activated, allowing him to see all the necessary data about living beings. Thanks to his skill, Yuhan learned that these chickens were so plump that their bodies contained more than 60 kilograms of pure protein. Yuhan thought that if these chickens were so nutritious, then he simply had to eat at least one such bird. Then Yuhan immediately attacked one chicken in order to eat it as soon as possible and get rid of hunger. Even though these chickens were so well fed and they ran very fast, Yuhan still managed to catch a couple of chickens and eat them. After a hearty lunch, Yuhan noticed that his arms had become much thinner than before. Yuhan also noticed that his pectoral muscles had also become much smaller. Yuhan walked up to the river, looked at himself in the reflection, and could not believe that all those muscles that he had trained all these years suddenly disappeared in one moment. Yuhan felt so sad that all his muscles had disappeared that for a moment he stopped wondering how he ended up in this world. After that, Yuhan walked to the nearest tree and began to think that he must regain his strong body. After that, Yuhan grabbed the tree as tightly as possible and pulled it out of the ground with its roots. After Yuhan pulled out the tree, he placed it on his shoulders and began to squat to get his muscles back. After several hours of grueling squats, Yuhan decided that training would be enough for today. After training, Yuhan felt that his muscles had not grown at all. Then Yuhan looked at the chickens running around the field and decided that he had enough protein for his muscles to become larger over time. Just as Yuhan was about to continue his training, a giant rooster appeared behind him. The rooster turned out to be many times larger than those chickens that were running around the field, and this rooster was even larger than many trees in the area. Yuhan decided that now he was unlikely to be able to defeat such a serious opponent, and then Yuhan decided to try to escape from the giant rooster. While Yuhan was trying to run away from the giant rooster, the rooster tried to stop Yuhan with a strong kick to the ground, but Yuhan continued to run away. Yuhan didn't know how he could resist the giant rooster since it was much stronger than him at the moment. While Yuhan was running away from the giant rooster, he also looked at the rooster and thought about how big his pectoral muscles were, and it would be nice if Yuhan had the same muscles. At this moment, Yuhan was thinking that his muscles were not growing because he only did strength exercises, from which his muscles did not grow at all. While Yuhan was trying to escape from the giant rooster, several chickens appeared on his way and blocked Yuhan's path. At the same moment, Yuhan's hawk vision was activated again, which could not help Yuhan in any way at the moment. Yuhan tried to run as quickly as possible, but the giant rooster was faster, and with every second he was getting even closer to Yuhan. While Yuhan was trying to escape, the hawk's eye showed Yuhan that this giant rooster was made of pure protein, and there was more than 12 tons of protein in this rooster. Yuhan also learned that if he ate the breast of this rooster, he would get faster muscle recovery. Then Yuhan thought that in order for him to regain his muscles, the ability to quickly restore his muscles would be very useful, and he decided to try to defeat the rooster. In order to quickly defeat the giant rooster, Yuhan decided to climb higher so that the rooster could not crush him. At that moment, Yuhan realized that his muscles would not grow during training, but only after them, when the muscles needed rest and time to heal themselves. During exercise, a person's muscles are severely damaged, and after exercising, the person will experience severe muscle pain as the muscles try to recover. After such restoration, the muscles grow together, as a result of which they become larger and stronger. At this moment, the rooster's neck became many times longer, and Yuhan jumped away from the tree towards the rooster so that he could not attack him. After Yuhan dodged the rooster's attack, he decided that he should attack the rooster as soon as possible. During the attack, a warning appeared in front of Yuhan that during the attack, his combat muscle contraction ability would stop working. Suddenly, the ability of combat muscle compression simply stopped working, and at the same moment, the muscles on Yuhan's arm immediately became many times larger. Then Yuhan decided that with such a pumped-up arm, he could defeat the giant rooster with just one blow. When Yuhan finally made his attack, the giant rooster was immediately defeated. At this moment, Yuhan was only thinking that tonight he would be dining on the breast of a giant protein rooster. Towards evening, Yuhan butchered the carcass of a giant rooster, after which he began greedily eating the huge rooster's breast. At this moment, several ghouls were hiding in the bushes not far from Yuhan, and were watching him. These ghouls were so hungry that they couldn't stop watching Yuhan eat the giant rooster's breast with great appetite. These ghouls had not eaten anything for a very long time, which is why their bones could be seen right through their skin. No one had been able to defeat a giant rooster so easily before, and the ghouls decided that Yuhan had the strength of a monster. Then one of the ghouls suggested approaching Yuhan and asking him for some food, but his comrades thought that this was a bad idea. Eventually, the ghouls decided to come out in front of Yuhan, and he asked the group of ghouls who they were and what they wanted from him. Then one of the ghouls said that they lived in this territory, which they called Ali's Mine. At this moment, the hawk's eye showed Yuhan that these ghouls contained about 600 grams of protein, but Yuhan believed that he would never eat ghouls. Then Yuhan simply looked at the ghouls and thought that this was the first time he had heard about these creatures. One of the ghouls told Yuhan that they were looking for someone who could defeat the giant rooster. Then Yuhan told the ghouls that it was he who killed this rooster, and he decided that this rooster was the food of the ghouls. The ghouls began to greatly rejoice that they were able to find the one who killed the giant rooster. Also, one of the ghouls told Yuhan that since he killed the strongest monster of these lands, now different species began to fight for these territories. Yuhan didn't listen to what this ghoul was telling him, and he just looked at how thin his legs were. Meanwhile, the ghoul continued to talk about how, despite the fact that this giant rooster was not the smartest creature, he still knew the entire local territory well. After this, the ghouls said that they now need the help of someone who could defeat this giant rooster. Yuhan finished listening to the ghouls and asked them to repeat what they had just told him again, since he did not hear what they told him. One of the ghouls told Yuhan that they had already repeated to him 0 times everything they had said before. Then Yuhan just laughed lightly and told the ghouls that they should always repeat everything 10 times. Suddenly, Yuhan's manner of communication became more rude and intimidating, and he once again told the ghouls that they must repeat everything they do 10 times. After these words, the ghouls believed that Yuhan would not help them, and then they decided that it was time for them to go back. Then Yuhan, in a softer form, told the ghouls that in the near future he would be busy pumping up his muscles, and that he would hardly have time left to help, and then the ghouls said that they would not waste his time. As the ghouls were about to leave, one of them told Yuhan that they were not upset at all, since they understood that everyone had their own circumstances. Then Yuhan invited the ghouls to take with them at least part of the meat that was left after the giant rooster. Then the ghouls stopped and decided that they really should take some food with them, since they had not eaten anything for a very long time. After that, Yuhan gave the ghouls the largest piece of meat and apologized to them for the fact that he could no longer help them in any way. Yuhan gave the ghouls such a large piece of meat that the 3 of them would have enough meat for several weeks. Then the ghouls decided to try to take this piece of meat, but it turned out to be too big and heavy for them, and they did not know how they could drag it. Yuhan watched as one of the ghouls tried to lift this piece of meat, and he believed that they needed help, since they could seriously injure their backs. After that, Yuhan walked up to this ghoul and started yelling at him for trying to lift this piece of meat incorrectly. With each passing second, Yuhan screamed louder at the ghoul, and he told him that if he continued to try to lift this piece of meat in this position, he might break his back. This ghoul was afraid that Yuhan was yelling at him so much, and then he apologized to Yuhan for his ignorance. Then Yuhan calmed down slightly, and thought that these ghouls did not know how to lift weights at all. Then the ghouls said that this was the first time they had ever heard that weights needed to be lifted somehow correctly. At this moment, Yuhan felt somewhat ashamed and told them that this was why they were so skinny and weak. Then the ghouls decided that they should try to lift this piece of meat with the three of them. But Yuhan believed that this would not help them much. Then Yuhan remembered the moment from elementary school when his coach told him that you can truly learn something only when you teach someone yourself. The coach also told Yuhan that if one day he stops achieving something in sports, then he can try to teach someone what he himself learned. Meanwhile, the ghouls had already managed to barely lift a huge piece of meat and tried to drag it. After a couple of seconds, one of the ghouls felt someone behind him helping him drag this piece of meat. Later, Yuhan took this piece of meat in his hands and invited the ghouls to have a little refreshment, and then head together to their settlement. Yuhan was also afraid that his muscles might disappear again, and he invited the ghouls to spend the night in his camp and go to the ghoul settlement tomorrow morning. And the ghouls were not against such an offer. The next day, Yuhan and the ghouls went to the ghoul settlement. The first thing Yuhan found himself in was the house of the lord of all the ghouls who lived in this area. When Yuhan arrived at the ghoul lord's house, he showed his hospitality and asked Yuhan if he had any difficulties on the way here. Yuhan kept looking at the ghoul lord and said that he got here without any difficulty. Yuhan looked at the ghoul lord and thought that he looked very much like a large toad, since he also had long legs and a large belly. At this moment, the ghoul lord thanked Yuhan for providing him and his people with such a valuable gift as a piece of giant rooster meat suitable for consumption. The ghoul lord also told Yuhan that his subjects would bring him the remaining meat, but Yuhan said that they had a lot of time for this. Then the ghoul lord only laughed loudly and could not believe that Yuhan was actually worried about the condition of his subjects. Yuhan felt that there was something wrong with this ghoul lord, and he asked him to get straight to the point. The ghoul lord then told Yuhan that because he had defeated the giant rooster, he and his people were in some trouble. The ghoul lord also told Yuhan that the ghoul people are the weakest people in the alley mines, since besides him, none of the ghouls have any skills anymore. Yuhan then interrupted the ghoul lord and asked him what skills he was talking about, since Yuhan had heard something about these skills in his head before. The ghoul lord couldn't believe that Yuhan really didn't know what skills he was talking about, and he thought that he was just joking. At this moment, the face of the ghoul lord became more evil and insidious, and then he ordered those ghouls that Yuhan came with to be brought to him. A second later, a couple of ghouls brought the same ghouls Yuhan had brought to the lord, and the lord ordered them to kneel before him. The ghouls knelt down and asked their lord why he had called them. The ghoul lord only told his subordinates that sometimes the criminal may not realize his mistake, after which he ordered his weapon to be brought to him. A couple of minutes later, several ghouls brought their lord his largest club. The ghoul lord took up his club and told the ghouls that the basis of their discipline was unquestioning loyalty to those who were stronger than them. The ghoul lord also told his subordinates that he wanted these ghouls to find the one who defeated this giant rooster, bring him to the settlement, and persuade him to submit to his will. However, the ghoul lord felt that his subjects had betrayed him, and so he wanted them to pay for their deception with their lives as soon as possible. The ghoul lord then used a special skill that makes his weapon heavier and prepared to finish off his subjects. The ghoul lord's subordinates believed that at that moment a severe punishment would overtake them, but something stopped the ghoul lord from delivering his crushing blow. Later, the ghouls saw that Yuhan stopped the ghoul lord, and he believed that this lord became the leader in this settlement only because he had enough strength to offend the weak. The ghoul lord was somewhat amazed that Yuhan managed to stop his strike so easily. At one point, the ghoul lord believed that he simply did not activate his skill, since it seemed to him that at the moment of impact his club became lighter again. Then the ghoul lord told Yuhan that since he managed to survive his blow, he would like to show his skill once again. The ghoul lord prepared to strike again, and told Yuhan that his weighting skill allowed him to increase the weight of objects in his hands from 2 to 10 times. After this, the ghoul lord told Yuhan that he now has enough mana to increase the weight of his club by 4 times. The ghoul lord also said that initially the weight of this club is 32 kilograms, and as its weight increases, the impact force will be simply incredibly enormous. After this, the Ghoul Lord used his waiting skill and prepared to flatten Yuhan with his club. However, Yuhan was not at all afraid of such an attack, and he simply put his hand under the blow, causing the Ghoul Lord's club to simply collapse. After the attack of the Ghoul Lord, Yuhan quickly approached the Lord and told him that he had a really useful and strong skill, and that he would not want to be at enmity with him. But he was somewhat surprised by the Lord's character. At that very second, Yuhan grabbed the Ghoul Lord by his neck and believed that the Ghoul Lord considered himself strong enough to control the lives of others. A second later, Yuhan squeezed the Ghoul Lord's neck even more tightly and asked him how many kilograms the Lord could handle in squats, bench presses, and deadlifts. The Ghoul Lord did not fully understand what Yuhan was telling him, and he thought that Yuhan wanted to fight him. Yuhan then explained that he was talking about exercises, and that if someone asks him how much weight he can do in these exercises, it means what is the maximum weight he can lift in these exercises. After that, Yuhan looked at the other ghouls and realized that no one among them had heard of these exercises before. Then Yuhan decided that now a competition should be held in which he and the Ghoul Lord would find out which of them was stronger. After a while, Yuhan went outside with the Ghoul Lord, and Yuhan explained to the Lord that they both just needed to lift the barbell to find out who was stronger. Before the Ghoul Lord performed the deadlift, he reminded Yuhan that if he won, he would serve him for the rest of his life. In response, Yuhan only told the Ghoul Lord that during the exercise he should tense his muscles as much as possible so as not to tear his back later. At this moment, the Ghoul Lord was absolutely confident of his victory, since his weighting skill could not only make objects heavier, but also significantly reduce their weight and make them lighter. After that, the Ghoul Lord used his skill and reduced the weight of the barbell from 200 to 50 kilograms, and he was able to lift the heavy barbell with ease. It was Yuhan's turn to do the deadlift, and he told the Ghoul Lord that next time he should tighten his glutes more. Yuhan also looked at the other ghouls and told them that if he wins, he will force them to do this exercise too. Before starting to perform the deadlift, Yuhan decided to stretch his body a little, since when performing a deadlift, almost all muscle groups are involved. During the warm-up, Yuhan thought that serious injuries could occur while performing deadlifts, and therefore it was important to relax the hip joints and ensure that the technique was performed correctly. Before performing a deadlift, Yuhan should place their feet shoulder-width apart and straighten up. After this, Yuhan must straighten his chest, tense his back and lower back and grab the barbell. Next, Yuhan should try to lift the barbell, giving impulse from the steps throughout the body. While Yuhan was trying to perform the exercise, the Ghoul Lord used his skill to make the barbell in Yuhan's hands become significantly heavier. However, despite the fact that the barbell became significantly heavier, Yuhan did not stop trying to lift it. As a result, Yuhan strained his muscles so much that he simply did not calculate his strength, and at that same second a barbell weighing 800 kilograms flew high into the sky. The Ghoul Lord and his subjects were shocked that Yuhan actually accidentally managed to send such a heavy barbell flying. Then Yuhan only apologized to the Ghoul Lord and told him that in this case it was necessary to make a new barbell. After a couple of seconds the bar landed on the ground, and the Ghoul Lord and his subjects bowed their knees before Yuhan and accepted him as the new Ghoul Lord. From this moment on, Yuhan becomes the new holder of the title of Ghoul Lord, and now the old Ghoul Lord will unquestioningly carry out all his instructions. From a short dialogue with the old Ghoul Lord, Yuhan realized that this world was very different from his previous world. Yuhan also learned that he could somehow return to his world, but Yuhan was afraid that if he returned to his world in this state, he would be considered a weakling, and he decided to postpone his return. Yuhan learned that this place is called Lei Sha, and that in this place everything works according to the law of the jungle, that is, the strongest creatures rule in this world over weaker creatures. To avoid any further confusion, Yuhan decided to address the previous Ghoul Lord as the old Ghoul Lord, since the old Ghoul Lord had forgotten his previous name. After a short conversation, the old Ghoul Lord led Yuhan to the place where ghouls usually train. Soon, Yuhan and the old Ghoul Lord arrived at a large empty field where there were no simulators or other items for training ghouls. Even though Yuhan had expected to see something like this based on the physical training of the ghouls, even so, he was somewhat amazed by what he saw. Then Yuhan wondered what kind of training the ghouls were doing here, but the old Ghoul Lord said that he himself did not know how his subordinates could even somehow train here. Then Yuhan believed that a first-class trainer himself could create simulators for training, after which he ordered all the ghouls to be gathered into formation. When Yuhan gathered all the ghouls, he told them that he knew that in these lands, ghouls are considered the weakest creatures, and that they are forced to eat what is left after other creatures. Yuhan then told the ghouls that in order to fix this, they need to pump up their muscles and become stronger. Yuhan also told the ghouls that from now on he will train them for 3 months, and during this time the ghouls will be able to become much stronger. The ghouls could not believe what Yuhan said, as they could not believe that he could make them stronger in such a short time. Many ghouls were encouraged by Yuhan's words, as they were confident that if they did so, the other creatures would stop treating them like weaklings. Yuhan saw that all the ghouls were ready to train, and he ordered all the ghouls to take a prone position, but no one reacted at all, since they did not know what it was. Then Yuhan assumed a prone position and told the ghouls to start doing push-ups right now. Then the ghouls began to try to get into a prone position, but none of the ghouls were able to get into a prone position correctly. This left Yuhan somewhat disappointed, and he then realized that he would have to do a lot of work to make these ghouls even a little stronger. Yuhan then told the ghouls to do 100 push-ups, and the ghouls started trying to do push-ups. After 3 hours of training, not a single ghoul was able to complete 100 push-ups, and many of them began to fall to the ground from lack of strength. While the ghouls were trying to repeat at least 100 push-ups, Yuhan had already managed to perform more than 20,000 push-ups with a heavy stone on his back without a break. At one point, the old ghoul lord told Yuhan that among all the ghouls, there was not a single one left who could hold out. Then Yuhan said that in that case, they all need to do another 100 push-ups, after which all the ghouls can go to lunch with him. All the ghouls were shocked that Yuhan was forcing them to do 10 more push-ups when they were supposed to do 700 push-ups before. Then many of them began to complain that if they continued to do push-ups, they would simply die. With every passing second, the number of ghouls who began to complain about the training became more and more, which somewhat disappointed Yuhan himself. At one point, Yuhan finally stopped doing push-ups and ordered all the ghouls to get back on their feet. The ghouls then stood up and began to think that Yuhan had finally decided to let them rest for a while. However, Yuhan only started yelling at the ghouls, and he told them that it was because they had no attitude that they were the weakest creatures. Then Yuhan believed that these ghouls were ready to continue to endure all these humiliations and oppression from other, stronger creatures. Also, Yuhan himself reminded the ghouls that in this world everything operates according to the law of the jungle, and he said that with this approach they will all soon die. Yuhan also told the ghouls that if they continue to feel sorry for themselves, then sooner or later their family and friends may be in danger. After that, Yuhan pointed to the side and told the ghouls that if there are those among them who want to continue to endure all these humiliations, then they can stop training and go home. After this, Yuhan told the ghouls that if they trusted him, they could become the most powerful creatures. At this moment, Yuhan was thinking about what it really meant to be the best coach. Yuhan used to believe that the best trainer has extensive knowledge of muscle structure, since this person knows exactly how to apply this knowledge in practice. However, at that moment, Yuhan realized that the best trainer must be able to give his student, without motivation, the will to continue training, so that in the future he will only become stronger. Yuhan then told the ghouls that they must believe in themselves so that they can continue to become better people. Yuhan did not stop telling the ghouls that they were doing all this for the sake of their family and friends, for the sake of their people and for the sake of their new essence. At this point, almost all the ghouls immediately gained strong motivation to continue training, despite the severe pain in their muscles. Yuhan continued to motivate the ghouls and instill in them faith in their abilities. Eventually, the ghouls stopped complaining of being very tired during training, and then they began to make every effort to become stronger. However, Yuhan also became better at this moment, as his coaching skills also became exponentially better. After 3 months, a group of humanoid lizards headed towards the place where the ghouls lived. During their hike, one of the lizards decided to make sure that they were going in the right direction, and one of his comrades told him that they had almost reached the ghoul settlement. Soon the lizards reached the ghoul village, and then one of the lizards suggested using their fighting abilities. However, Another lizard believed that the ghouls were weak enough to defeat them without the use of combat skills. Then the lizards decided that they could easily capture this ghoul village and turn it into their colony. Soon, Yuhan and the old ghoul lord noticed that an army of lizards was approaching towards their village. Then Yuhan ordered the ghouls to leave all their affairs for later and prepare to defend the village. Soon the ghouls began to watch the advance of the lizards in order to choose the right moment for defense. When the lizards got close enough, the ghouls began to roll many large and heavy stone boulders onto the lizards. After such an attack, many lizards could not continue the fight, and then they only wanted to find out who dared to attack them. Yuhan then looked at the lizards and told them that they were attacked by ghouls. Yuhan also told the lizards that ghouls are now considered far from the weakest creatures. At this moment, one of the lizards considered that if he did not do anything right now, he could suffer great losses among the warriors. Then this lizard looked at the old ghoul lord and believed that if he could capture him, he could change the outcome of the invasion. Later, the lizard felt how strong the mana was coming from the old ghoul lord, and he believed that he could easily defeat the old ghoul lord. Then the lizard demanded that the ghoul lord come down to him as soon as possible. Yuhan and the old ghoul lord watched as this lizard tried to provoke the ghoul lord into coming down to him. The old ghoul lord looked at Yuhan and asked him how he would react to this enemy provocation. At this moment, Yuhan remembered that he had a saltwater crocodile as a pet as a child, and this crocodile would often drool when he wanted to be played with. This crocodile was very dangerous, since its bite force was estimated at about 2 tons, and even an adult could not resist this animal in any way in case of danger. However, despite such great strength and its natural aggression, this crocodile still could not harm Yuhan with his pumped-up muscles. At this moment, Yuhan felt that in order to stop this lizard, he should try to calm it down just like he did with his pet crocodile. Then Yuhan immediately jumped off the cliff from which he had been watching the advance of the lizards. The lizard thought that since Yuhan was coming down to him instead of the previous ghoul lord, he was admitting defeat, since he did not know that the old ghoul lord was no longer the leader of the ghoul village. After Yuhan landed on the ground, he immediately grabbed the lizard by the armpits and threw him onto his back on the ground. After this, Yuhan immediately began to look intently into the lizard's eyes to show him that he was not afraid of him and that he was stronger than him. The lizard was very scared when Yuhan started looking into his eyes so intently, and he demanded that Yuhan let him go right now. However, instead of letting the lizard go, Yuhan began to continuously repeat to the lizard that he was stronger than him, so that the lizard would experience even more fear. With every second the lizard became more and more afraid, and he asked Yuhan to stop disgracing him in front of his warriors. However, Yuhan continued to irritate the lizard, and he continued to tell the lizard that he was stronger than him. As a result, the frightened lizard could no longer tolerate such serious psychological pressure, and he told Yuhan that he was admitting defeat. Yuhan immediately released the lizard, and he was glad that this time his technique of calming his pet crocodile worked on the huge humanoid lizard. Meanwhile, the ghouls began to greatly rejoice that for the first time in all this time they had finally managed to defeat such a serious opponent. Meanwhile, in the neighboring county of Werdo, the Count was knighting new warriors from his county. At this moment, Count Werdo ordered his new knights to find out the circumstances of the disappearance of a giant rooster that lived in the territory of the alley mines. The new knights swore allegiance to Count Werdo, after which they immediately set off to complete their first task. After the new knights left the chambers of Count Werdo, the Count decided to ask the captain of the knightly guard why she decided to entrust such an important task to some youths. Then the captain of the knightly guard told Count Werdo that despite the fact that these knights were still so young, they were still considered true professionals. The first knight's name was Raper, and he was the best in the county with a light sword, and even the captain of the knightly guard himself could envy his skills. The second knight's name was Hendard, and he was skilled with a large two-handed sword, and despite the fact that his sword was never sharpened, Hendard could still cut through his enemies with ease. The captain of the knightly guard believed that with the joint efforts of Raper and Hendard they could defeat even a dragon. Then Count Werdo decided to find out from the captain of the knightly guard what was unique about the third knight, who was with Raper and Hendard. At this moment, the captain of the knightly guard was somewhat confused, since the third knight did not have any special combat skills. Then Count Werdo did not understand why the captain of the knightly guard sent this knight on a mission. Then the captain of the knightly guard said that this knight had been friends with Raper and Hendard since childhood, and that they were very attached to each other. Meanwhile, Raper Hendard and the third knight named Blog were already in the vicinity of Alley. At this moment, one of the goblins was watching the knights, and this goblin was already preparing to attack them. A second later, the goblin took out an arrow and prepared to shoot one of the knights with his bow. Before the goblin had time to release the arrow and shoot, Raper was already behind this goblin. The moment the goblin released the arrow, Raper managed to draw his sword and behead the hostile goblin. As the arrow flew past Blog, several more goblins appeared from the bushes and sat in ambush. Then Hendard took out his sword and began to cut down the goblins attacking him and Blog one by one. Raper told Hendard that their first priority for now was to protect the Blog. At this moment, Blog also took out his sword and shield, despite the fact that they could not withstand the attacking goblins. After a short battle, Raper and Hendard managed to defeat all the goblins that attacked them, and after the battle they decided to check on the condition of the Blog. Raper was very angry at Hendard for accidentally missing one of the goblins' attack towards Blog, and Hendard just stood there and listened to Raper's screams. While Raper continued to yell at Hendard, Blog was ashamed of himself for not being able to fight on par with Raper and Hendard. Meanwhile, Han Yu, along with the ghouls and the lizards who attacked them, performed assisted push-ups. Very soon the lizards began to complain that they were very tired of doing the exercises, but Han Yu and the ghouls did not even think about stopping doing the exercises. After a long training, Yu Han finally released the lizards and allowed them to return unharmed. The ghouls thought it would be nice if the lizards trained with them more often, but the lizards did not plan to return to the ghouls anytime soon. Soon the ghouls finally said goodbye to the lizards, but at that moment the lizards only thought that they should leave this village as soon as possible. At this moment, Yu Han looked at the ghouls and thought that he, too, was very surprised when he first saw the ghouls so pumped up. One day in the 9th week of training, the ghouls' progress dropped dramatically, as they now struggled to do 3,400 push-ups, whereas the day before they could easily do 3,500 push-ups. Yu Han believed that it was necessary to give the ghouls a fasting day so that their muscles could rest and recover. If a person experiences fatigue in the central nervous system, then the effectiveness of his training decreases greatly, and then the chances of unexpected injuries increase. In order to reduce the risk of injury and increase the effectiveness of training, there is unloading, during which the body restores its strength, from which the muscles also begin to recover. However, Yu Han was very surprised when he saw that after a short rest, the ghouls' muscles became larger the very next day after their last training. Yu Han was amazed at how quickly the ghouls became taller and stronger, and it even scared Yu Han a little. Using his hawk vision, Yu Han saw the progress of how much the ghouls' muscle mass had increased, and how much their fat mass had decreased. Yu Han looked at all this data and thought that now the ghouls will no longer need unloading. After the lizards finally left the ghoul village, Yu Han offered the ghouls a little refreshment. Then one of the ghouls asked Yu Han if they could try hunting themselves this time. Yu Han was somewhat wary of the ghouls being so independent, and he believed that they just wanted to skip the training and run away. However, one of the ghouls told Yu Han that they had never hunted big chickens on their own before, but only carried the bodies of those chickens that Yu Han caught. Then this ghoul thought that since they had become so strong, they could catch the chickens themselves. After this explanation, Yu Han felt that the ghouls should actually try hunting on their own, and that in that case it would also be worth increasing their training time. At this moment, the old ghoul lord was thinking about whether the ghouls could defeat Yu Han. A second later, the old ghoul lord realized that he had just spoken his thoughts out loud, and that Yu Han had heard everything he had just said. Then the old ghoul lord told Yu Han that he had simply misspoken, and he was only thinking about whether the ghouls, by combining their efforts, could be stronger than Yu Han. Yu Han then put his hand on the old ghoul lord's shoulder and calmed him down, and he explained to the old ghoul lord that a trained athlete like him would never lose to newcomers like the ghouls. After that, Yu Han and several ghouls went hunting for huge chickens. On the way to the hunting place, the ghouls traveled not with ordinary steps, but with lunges of their legs forward, and it was very difficult for them to continue walking like this. Yu Han watched the ghouls coming, and he told them that this was part of their training. Suddenly, at one moment, one of the ghouls incorrectly put his leg forward, from which he received a severe muscle injury. Due to severe pain, the ghoul fell to the ground and grabbed his injured leg, and this ghoul could not continue on his way in this condition. Yu Han looked at this ghoul and thought that if at least one of the ghouls had the same strong joints as his, then this could motivate the rest of the ghouls. However, Yu Han and the ghouls had walked too far to return to camp, and then he simply ordered the ghoul with the injured leg to get up and continue following with the rest of the ghouls. That same night, Blog went outside and began to train hard while Raper and Hendard went to bed. The Blog believed that if he were strong enough to fight his enemies on his own, then Raper and Hendard would stop fighting over him. Then the Blog decided to train during rest in order to sooner or later become stronger. Suddenly, at one moment, Raper appeared behind the Blog, who was trying to help the Blog during training. At this moment, Blog felt very ashamed, since he believed that Raper woke up precisely because of him. However, Raper told Blog that he actually knew that Blog was training at night in secret from Raper and Hendard. A second later, Raper grabbed Blog's cheek and told him that he would really like to help him speed up his progress in training. After that, Raper let go of Blog and started laughing, which made Blog think he was doing something wrong. Suddenly, at the same moment, Hendard appeared, who wanted to know what Blog and Raper were doing at such a time, and why they were both awake. The Blog wanted to tell Hendard that he was just training, and that Raper wanted to help him out a little. However, Raper did not allow Blog to finish, and he began to ask Hendard how he dared appear here after he almost put Blog in danger. Hendard only told Raper that it was time for them all to go to bed, since if they didn't get enough sleep tomorrow, they would be more tired tomorrow. Then Raper told Blog that they would now finish training and go to bed. But Blog only asked Raper and Hendard why they were constantly arguing about him. Raper told Blog that they were friends and that they were very worried about him, but Blog still didn't understand why the friends were arguing over another friend. Then at one point the Blog decided that there was no point in trying to find an answer to this question, since Raper and Hendard were only laughing it off, and he decided that it was really time for them all to go to bed. At that moment, lizards who had previously tried to attack the ghoul village burst into the knight's camp, and the knights prepared to hold the defense. Raper and Hendard took out their swords and prepared to fight to once again protect Blog. In fact, the lizards did not intend to attack the knights, and in fact they were simply trying to escape from someone. At that moment, a large crowd of huge chickens ran towards the fleeing lizards. In turn, the chickens tried to escape as quickly as possible from Yuhan and the crowd of pumped-up ghouls, who took a long time to get to their habitat. A few hours earlier, Yuhan and his crowd of ghouls had finally reached the chickens' habitat. Yuhan had some doubts that the ghouls would be able to defeat the chickens, since it seemed to him that the muscles of the chickens were much larger and stronger. However, the ghouls felt that the muscles of the chickens were just very inflated, and that there was no practical strength in them, and such self-confidence of the ghouls made Yuhan somewhat angry. Suddenly the ghouls saw how one of the chickens, chasing a worm, got stuck between the trees. Instead of trying to get out, this chicken immediately tensed all her muscles to the limit. After a couple of seconds, the chicken tensed her muscles so much that the trees between which she was stuck immediately broke, and then the chicken managed to catch and eat her worm. Yuhan and the ghouls saw how this chicken destroyed 2 trees at once, and they thought that they could not defeat these chickens. Then one of the ghouls got up and went to the 2 nearest trees to try to break them the same way the chicken did. The ghoul did a little warm-up and began trying to break the trees. However, despite all his efforts and the strength of his muscles, this ghoul did not manage to break the trees. After a few seconds, the ghoul was exhausted, and he said that he should rest first, and then he would definitely be able to break these trees. After this ghoul caught his breath, Yuhan advised him to move one leg back a little to create a little support. This ghoul did everything as Yuhan told him, and he was ready to try to demolish these trees again. Yuhan and the rest of the ghouls stood aside and watched how this ghoul would manage to demolish the trees. After a couple of seconds, the ghoul began to try to tear down the trees again, and this time he tried to tense his muscles even more. However, despite all his efforts, the ghoul was unable to break down these trees, and then Yuhan decided that this ghoul should stop trying to tear down the trees for now. Yuhan looked at this ghoul and tried to understand why this ghoul failed to demolish these trees, since Yuhan believed that the bench press was supposed to greatly improve the efficiency of all the joints in the ghoul's body. While Yuhan was trying to understand what the ghouls were doing wrong, he noticed how the chickens began to line up. After the chickens lined up, they grabbed each other with their wings and began to pull each other in different directions. At this moment, Yuhan realized what his mistake as a trainer was, and Yuhan could not notice this mistake earlier due to the constant progress of the ghouls. Then Yuhan told the ghouls that it was his fault that the ghouls could not repeat what these chickens could easily do. The ghouls believed that they were doing something wrong, however, Yuhan explained to the ghouls that they were simply accustomed to his training. The ghouls couldn't accept the fact that they were actually used to Yuhan's training, and Yuhan said that he should at least diversify their training somehow. After that, Yuhan left for a while, and within a few minutes he returned to the ghouls and ordered them to line up. At that moment, Yuhan showed the ghouls a new simulator, called a crossover, by tying elastic bands to two nearby trees. After Yuhan introduced the crossover to the ghouls, he told them that if the ghouls can pump up their muscles on this simulator, then they can easily repeat the same thing that these chickens can do. The ghouls were happy that Yuhan was trying to diversify their training, and they couldn't wait to start crossover training. Before the ghouls began crossover training, Yuhan wanted to show them how to properly perform crossover exercises. First of all, Yuhan explained to the ghouls that crossover exercises are designed to pump up the internal chest muscles. Before starting to perform exercises on the crossover, Yuhan showed the ghouls the pose necessary for training, during which they need to bend their knees and tilt their upper torso. In addition to body position, you need to place your arms in such a position that during the exercise their position always remains the same. During the crossover exercise, you need to stretch your chest forward and begin to move your arms towards the center, as if a bird is trying to flap its wings for a successful takeoff. You can also slightly change the angle of your lower back and the position of the ropes in your hands so that other chest muscles are pumped during the exercise. After Yuhan explained the crossover training method to the ghouls, he showed them several more trees where they could also train their pectoral muscles. At this moment, the ghouls immediately rushed to the new simulators in order to pump up their muscles as quickly as possible. Yuhan looked with emotion at the ghouls rushing towards the new crossovers, and thought that there was nothing sweeter in the world than novice athletes. After some time, all the ghouls managed to complete several sets of crossover exercises, and soon they began to feel a surge of strength in their chests. After training, the ghouls decided to try hunting chickens, hoping that they now had every chance of a successful hunt. However, when the chickens saw the pumped-up ghouls, they suddenly began to glow brightly and scream loudly. Yuhan and the ghouls did not understand what exactly was happening to the chickens, and they decided not to attack the chickens for now. After a few seconds, the chickens stopped glowing, and after that their plumage changed somewhat. It seemed to Yuhan that the pectoral muscles of the chickens suddenly became even stronger, and the ghouls immediately began to attack the chickens. The ghouls were absolutely confident in their abilities, and they ran towards the changed chickens as quickly as possible. However, instead of starting to run away, the chickens also ran towards the angry ghouls. At this moment, Yuhan decided to use the vision of a hawk and understand how much the chicken's performance had changed. The hawk's vision showed Yuhan that after this strange glow, the chicken's muscle mass and protein content in their bodies increased greatly. Because of this mysterious glow, the chickens could easily deal with the ghouls. Yuhan also learned that the chest of chickens was filled with greatness, which is why an evolutionary process occurred, after which they became even stronger and more dangerous. In order to stop the further evolution of chickens, Yuhan had to concentrate all his strength in his pectoral muscles. While the rest of the ghouls hunted chickens with Yuhan, the old ghoul lord remained in the village to guard it from intruders. However, due to the fact that the ghouls had become much stronger recently, no one was planning to attack the village, and the old ghoul lord could do nothing. Despite this, the old ghoul lord found it somewhat boring to be alone in the entire village, and over time the old lord became very hungry. Then the old ghoul lord decided that since he couldn't go chicken hunting with the rest of the ghouls, he should try to cook something tasty. A few minutes later, the old ghoul lord decided to prepare a very tasty and nutritious dish, for the preparation of which he would need chicken skin, chicken meat, spices, salt and vegetable oil. The first thing the old ghoul lord was going to do was wash the chicken skin with the chicken meat, and cut it into several long pieces. After the old ghoul lord cut the chicken skin and meat into pieces, he began to soak the pieces with salt and spices so that all the pieces were well seasoned and had a pleasant aroma. After the pieces were soaked in salt and spices, the old ghoul lord mixed breading flour with ground pepper. When the breading mixture was ready, the old ghoul lord began to sprinkle the mixture onto the chopped pieces of chicken skin and meat. After that, the old ghoul lord began to place the pieces in a frying pan with hot oil and fry them until the pieces began to become crispy golden brown. After a few minutes, the old ghoul lord had a lot of chicken pieces in a crispy and very tasty breading, and this dish can also be eaten with ketchup, mayonnaise, mustard and other sauces. Meanwhile, the ghouls continued to catch at least a few chickens. However, Due to the large difference in strength, the ghouls could not do anything to catch the chickens. The ghouls could not understand what they were doing wrong, because it seemed to them that they were doing everything that Yuhan told them to become stronger. The ghouls were desperate, and they began to think about what they were doing wrong, from poor posture to lack of muscle mass. However, Yuhan told the ghouls that the problem was that chickens had been training their bodies their entire lives, while ghouls had only started developing their muscles relatively recently. The ghouls realized that they were unlikely to be able to somehow surpass these chickens in muscle mass and strength. However, even though the ghouls did not train their muscles for as long as these huge chickens, Yuhan believed that they still had a way to defeat these chickens and return to the village with good prey. The ghouls found it hard to believe that they could do anything against these chickens, and Yuhan decided to remind them how they reached the point where they now have such large and strong muscles. Yuhan reminded the ghouls that through their joint efforts they had achieved such a good result, and in the process they themselves had already entered into a certain rhythm. Yuhan noticed that even despite the heavy workload, the ghouls did not show any signs of fatigue and continued to strive for their goal. Yuhan believed that thanks to such determination and joint training, they became what they are now. However, Yuhan also believed that even though ghouls had become a little stronger, they were still not the strongest creatures. Yuhan told the ghouls that in the world he previously lived in, his base squat weight was 500 kilograms, which greatly surprised the ghouls. Yuhan also told the ghouls that during training, one is constantly faced with overcoming difficulties, and that one must continue to try to overcome these difficulties and thereby become better. Yuhan's words greatly motivated the ghouls to continue trying to defeat the huge chickens. At that moment, when the ghouls were preparing to attack the huge chickens again, Yuhan considered that in addition to the pectoral muscles, the ghouls should also pump up their lower muscle groups. A second later, several ghouls rushed towards the chickens in the hope of overpowering them and bringing their juicy and protein-soaked bodies to the village. At this moment, Yuhan was confident that after this, the ghouls would definitely be able to defeat the chickens. However, despite all the efforts of the ghouls and all their confidence in their abilities, the huge chickens were still able to easily repel the attack of the ghouls. At this moment, Yuhan and the ghouls began to think about what they had done wrong, that the chickens still continued to fight them off without any difficulty. Then Yuhan realized that during all the time that the ghouls got to the hunting site, their lower muscles were very exhausted, which made them very weak. Yuhan was ashamed that this realization came to him too late, and he believed that under such conditions the ghouls would not be able to do anything with these chickens. After the chickens dealt with all the ghouls, they immediately began to look at Yuhan. With each passing second, the chickens screamed louder, letting Yuhan know that they were going to deal with Yuhan the same way they dealt with the ghouls. Even though Yuhan had gone an equally long way with the ghouls, his muscles were still more toned, and he had a much better chance of defeating a crowd of huge mad chickens. Huge chickens begin to train hard from birth so that later they can grow into large and strong birds. As chickens get bigger, they also continue to exercise their muscles, and they keep getting bigger and stronger. Due to constant training, adult chickens can become quite strong opponents that few can defeat so easily. However, despite all his strength, Yuhan still managed to defeat the huge chickens and bring their bodies to the ghoul village. After a very successful hunt, Yuhan told the ghouls that even though they were unable to defeat the chickens on their own this time, they were still making good progress in their training. Yuhan wanted the ghouls to eat well this evening so that their muscles could recover and they could have a chance to deal with the chickens on their own on the next hunt. After all the chicken was ready for consumption, Yuhan began eating with the ghouls, and after such a hearty dinner, Yuhan did 300 push-ups with the ghouls. The next morning, Yuhan gathered all the ghouls together to tell them about their plans for the day. Yuhan told the ghouls that in order to master everything he taught them, they must go hunting on their own and put all their skills into practice. After Yuhan told the ghouls about their mission, they thought that this time they would hunt without Yuhan. However, Yuhan told the ghouls that first he should train a little, after which he would join the hunt. Yuhan also told the ghouls that for a real athlete, training should be more important than any battles, after which the ghouls went hunting. When the ghouls went hunting, Yuhan looked at the mountains and thought that his crossover was too light to train properly, and that he should also take the old ghoul lord hunting. After some time, the ghouls reached the hunting spot, and before starting the hunt, they thought that with their current form, they had a chance of defeating the huge chickens. The ghouls also believed that if chickens were able to evolve today, they would be putting themselves at great risk. At first, the ghouls wanted to train a little and return to the village, but one of the ghouls felt that Yuhan and the old ghoul lord did not tell them about the conditions under which the hunt could be considered successful. The ghouls understood that a chicken that evolved would pose a great threat to them, and they believed that Yuhan brought 27 ordinary chickens and one chicken that evolved to the village. Then this ghoul thought that the hunt could be considered successful if they managed to catch 50 ordinary chickens before Yuhan joined the hunt. Later, this ghoul suggested that all the other ghouls divide into 3 groups, and in case of danger, they will signal each other with their pectoral muscles. After this, the ghouls chose 3 commanders-in-chief and divided into 3 groups, after which the ghouls prepared to begin the hunt. Meanwhile, the knights of Werdo County finally managed to reach the place where Yuhan left the remains of the giant rooster he had eaten. The first thing Hender noticed was that the head of the giant rooster was separate from the body, and he believed that someone had used very strong magic to defeat the rooster. The blog speculated that the only one who could harness such powerful magic could be the Royal High Mage Adam. At one point, blog began to doubt that they would be able to cope with this task at all, but Raper and Hendard reassured him and told him that they would not let him be offended. Such excessive concern began to greatly irritate Blog, and he told Raper and Hendard that they should concentrate on the task, and at that moment they heard a strange rustling nearby. Raper and Hendard immediately ordered Blog to retreat back, hoping that they would now have to engage in another battle. A few seconds later, several huge chickens ran out of the bushes, as if they were running away from something. Behind the huge chickens were ghouls, one of the groups of which had already managed to catch half of the required number of chickens. The ghouls were so carried away by hunting chickens that they did not even immediately notice the knights, towards whom the chickens ran. Raper looked at the pumped-up ghouls and said that it was the first time in his life that he had seen these creatures, and he told Hander to stay with Blog and protect him. However, despite the current situation, Blog was still annoyed that Raper and Hender did not allow him to take part in the battle. Suddenly the ghouls finally paid attention to the people and stopped, as they believed that the people were extremely cruel creatures who enjoyed killing. At this moment, the ghouls simply froze in place, as they believed that any rash decision could provoke a conflict between humans and ghouls. At this point, the ghouls began trying to signal with their chest muscles to call other groups of ghouls for help. Blog looked at the ghouls and did not understand what they were doing, and he believed that in this way the ghouls were trying to seem even more dangerous. With each passing second, more and more ghouls began to use chest summoning to ensure that the remaining groups of ghouls arrived on the scene as quickly as possible. Huge chickens watched the ghouls use pectoral summoning, which caused some chickens to evolve. The Blog was looking at how one of the chickens had evolved, and he remembered that one such chicken had the strength of one wyvern. After a few seconds, all the chickens evolved, and then all these chickens ran towards the ghouls. However, despite the danger that arose, the ghouls still stood in place and continued to use the technique of summoning other ghouls with their pectoral muscles. Soon, ghouls from other groups arrived at the summoning site and prepared to defend themselves from the angry chickens. When all the ghouls arrived at the battle site, they immediately prepared to use the secret technique that Yuhan had once taught them. One day, one of the ghouls was doing a bench press with a very heavy barbell, and at one point he felt that he could no longer consistently support the weight of this barbell. At that moment, Yuhan approached the ghoul, grabbed the barbell with one hand and told the ghoul that if one day he was unable to complete the exercise, he could turn to someone for insurance. Yuhan also asked the ghoul what he could do to feel his strength without putting anyone in danger. At this moment, the ghouls lined up in front of the chickens in such a way that 3 ghouls stood behind the 4th ghoul and began to support him. Thanks to this stance, the 4th ghoul could, with the help of the other 3 ghouls, direct all his strength to neutralize the chickens. This force was enough to grab the chicken by the head without any fear and begin to hold it. The secret of such support is that the ghoul who stands in front can, without any fear, direct all his forces to neutralize the chicken. Thanks to this technique, the ghouls easily managed to neutralize even those chickens that had managed to evolve. However, at one moment, all the ghouls noticed that one of the ghouls was left without support. Despite the almost complete absence of any chance of victory, and the fact that this ghoul was left without support, he only looked at the other ghouls and wished them good luck in the battle. The rest of the ghouls could not allow at least one ghoul to be left without support, but they also could not stop supporting other ghouls. A second later, the lone ghoul felt someone stand behind him and begin to support him. The Blog tried to somehow help this ghoul hold his defense, while Raper and Hendard began to fight off the remaining chickens. This ghoul believed that these people were able to answer the call of the pectoral muscles and decided to help them. However, at that moment, when Raper and Hendard fought off all the chickens, a very large chicken appeared on the battlefield, which was many times larger and stronger than all the other chickens. This chicken was so big that it could be compared in size to a real dragon. Even before the appearance of all types of creatures, there lived a dragon on these lands, which was considered the greatest lover of hunting among other dragons. This dragon was afraid that sooner or later the later dragons would surpass him in everything, and so this dragon decided to take advantage of the division of power. Thanks to this division of power, creatures such as modern dragons and huge chickens appeared on Earth. Hendard believed that despite the fact that this chicken was much inferior in strength to an ordinary dragon, he believed that if he could defeat it, he would receive approval from his mentor. After these thoughts, Hendard and Raper decided to try to defeat this giant chicken. Meanwhile, Yuhan continued to train on one of the homemade crossovers. During training, Yuhan noticed that compared to ghouls, his muscle mass was gaining much more slowly. Despite such a big difference in muscle growth, Yuhan was still pleased to know that the ghouls were trying so hard to be athletes like him. At that moment, Yuhan remembered the days when he first met the ghouls and ended up in their village. It's been 3 months since Yuhan started training these ghouls, and Yuhan remembers with fondness the first days of their training together. Yuhan was very pleased to realize that despite the fact that at first many ghouls wanted to give up, he managed to motivate them to continue improving their muscles. Thanks to Yuhan, the ghouls acquired such spiritual qualities as desire, perseverance, and determination, thanks to which they became what they have become now. At that moment, Yuhan realized that he was enjoying the ghouls' success as much as if he himself had achieved the results that the ghouls had achieved. Then Yuhan thought that now he could use some advice from his coach, but he remembered that his coach had mysteriously disappeared at about the same age as him. At that moment, one of the ghouls came running to Yuhan, who wanted to inform Yuhan about the most unpleasant news. When the ghoul ran to Yuhan, he informed him that the huge chickens had evolved, and now they posed a serious threat to them. This ghoul feared that if they didn't take action, sooner or later they might all die. After that, Yuhan sat up in the air and asked the ghoul which way he should go. After the ghoul indicated the direction in which the fight with the chickens was taking place, a message appeared in front of Yuhan that due to excess energy, his combat muscle contraction skill may be unstable. After this, Yuhan temporarily turned off his martial muscle contraction skill, causing his muscles to begin to grow to impossible sizes. At this moment, Yuhan only thought that he must quickly save the ghouls that he had been training so hard all this time. As Yuhan's muscles continued to grow, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. After the muscles on Yuhan's legs became large enough, Yuhan took a leap and immediately found himself high in the sky. Yuhan jumped so high that within a second of his jump, the goblin could not see him in the sky. Meanwhile, Raper and Hendard continued to fight against the giant chicken. During the fight, Raper asked Hendard to distract the chicken so he could try to attack its vital organs. At this moment, Hendard used the technique of scattering sand, which was supposed to blind the chicken. After performing this maneuver, Hendard told the blog that he deliberately bought some time so that he could run to safety. However, Blog told Hendard that instead of trying to save him, he could attack the chicken and help Raper disarm it.